Hey, welcome to my week one video. I wanted to make sure that every week I find a more personal way to reach you guys, and so I've decided to do weekly videos, and I think that this will just kind of be a rundown of what to do each week. Hopefully, I'm not super long-winded. There's so much content every week that I want you to look at that these videos might end up being 20 minutes long, and I apologize. You don't necessarily have to watch them, but I do think that they offer an element of the course that you're not going to get otherwise. So do what you want with it. Because this is like the first day of class, and because we're starting off fresh, I'm just going to go through a couple things in the announcements section. Usually my weekly videos will take you straight to the weekly assignments, but there's some things I want to point out here that I haven't talked about yet. So introduction videos, if you haven't watched them already, please check them out if you want. The course syllabus and welcome video basically just tells you a little bit more about me, and it tells you about the course syllabus. So there's some information that maybe you don't want to read the course syllabus, maybe you just want to listen to it. Maybe you're driving and you're like, hey, I could listen to this video over the speakers in my car as opposed to read through the syllabus. You don't have time. So maybe these videos will be helpful in that way. The Blackboard navigation video is going to show you all the elements of our course in Blackboard. So if you're really familiar with Blackboard, you probably don't have to watch that video. Maybe you're like, oh, I already watched it. Thanks. Sorry. But if you don't really know anything about Blackboard, then you might want to watch the video if you haven't watched it already. So once I'm done making this video, I'm going to post it here, and you guys will obviously see it there. Now, the other thing I want you to do, or I don't want you to do it, but I hope that you will, I guess it kind of just depends on you and your personal preference, of course, is sign up for Remind. Remind is a phone app, but there's like website too if you don't have a smartphone. But if you don't have a smartphone, I'm not really sure that it's useful. So, well, I guess, never mind. It's useful because you can still text message without a smartphone. Oh my gosh. I am silly. So sign up for Remind. Remind is basically a way for us to communicate via text message, and what you can do is follow this link and it will take you to a separate website where you will join our course, and you'll kind of like, this is not what you'll see actually because I'm already logged in. It's taking me directly here, but you'll go ahead and log in. Like, I think if I log out, I don't know how to do that, and I'm not going to waste time logging out, but if I do log out, then it will probably take you to a page kind of like this, or a page asking you to go ahead and register. And you can register for our course. Or you can text the code at K8H4KD to 81010, and that is also how you can go ahead and opt in. And again, it's just going to give you the opportunity to be able to communicate with me via text message. I actually broke my phone yesterday, y'all, so I have to go get a new phone because I need to have a phone. Can't live without my phone, so I'm doing that today. But once that is fixed, which it's like the 1st of February, so by the time this class starts, it will be done and fixed, and I'll have a brand new phone to be able to text you with lots of cool English stuff. So I'll send out reminders on there too if you like to get text message reminders. There's more information in this, and you can read about it if you want. There's also information down here in the Welcome to English 112. Basically talks about like what's the first thing you should do in this class, which is do your enrollment verification, go to week 1 and start looking at that learning module stuff, and do your quiz on MLA format by Wednesday. Those are the first 3 things that you should do in this class. How to navigate the course, you can read through this, you can watch the Blackboard video, whatever you prefer. And how to be successful in this course, I've got some helpful tips here. Some of the things I talk about in the syllabus, and some things are just new here, some things I talk about in other videos, so I'm not going to spend time talking about that. You've already gotten information. I think I emailed this to you the last day in January, so you've already read that. All right, this is the week 1 video, so I'm jumping straight into the weekly assignments. I'm skipping getting started because I went through that in a different video. Okay, and I'm also gonna, why did I do this? I'm gonna look at it in student preview mode, so you get to see me do this again. Weekly assignments, week 1. Here we go. Do your enrollment verification. What you're going to do with that is you are going to make sure that you've read through everything in getting started, that you've read through the syllabus or you've watched the syllabus video, and then you're going to go to Student Questions and Help Discussion Forum, and you're going to create a new thread where you post a question about the class. So something that maybe you were uncertain about after watching the videos or after reading the syllabus and gone through the course and its information. When you post your question, make sure that you title it with a subject, question about the plagiarism policy. You title it with a subject that is relative to the question so that not all of ours are just titled enrollment verification. It'll be easier to kind of navigate through the forum if we do it this way. And then you'll type your question here. So maybe you want to know, like, will you take off points for plagiarism? Yes, I will. You'll get a 0. That's the answer. And then you click submit, and bam, you're done. That's enrollment verification. That's all that you have to do, but it's really important that you do it. I'm going to go in and delete this later. You guys won't see it, but that's just a sample of what I want you to do. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to the forum, and then you'll see the questions and answers pop up in your email. Back to, why do I have to go back this way? Back to week 1. After you've done your enrollment verification, then it's going to be really important that you go ahead and jump into that learning module. What are we doing this week? So the first thing that you're doing is reading chapter 1. Essentially, the whole point of this week is to familiarize yourself with the unit project, which is the MLA unit, to familiarize yourself with some samples of the first step in that unit project, which is the annotated bibliography. And then to learn about sources like primary sources, secondary sources, where you can find sources, and to learn about MLA format. All of that stuff you need to know in order to take the quiz on MLA format, in order to start working on your annotated bibliography, and in order to just be successful right off the bat. So start with reading chapter 1, reading critically, and perspectives on contemporary issues. This is going to cover topics like, let's take a peek. Rhetorical analysis. It's going to cover topics like analyzing visuals and analyzing websites. And so I think it will be helpful just in kind of like finding sources and finding credible sources and things like that. In this folder, I give you the 3 major assignments of the MLA project. And that's an annotated bibliography, which is due on the 18th of February. That is a research proposal, which is due on the 4th of March. And then it's a final 7 to 10 page MLA paper, which is due on the 25th. So I'm going to spend probably 10 minutes now talking a little bit about that project so that you have more details. Okay, so let's talk about your first unit project. I am going to refresh my page because it's been a little while since I've logged in and I'm probably kicked out. That's what I figured. Okay, so the first unit project, I'll just talk about a little bit while I'm waiting to get back into the course, is an MLA format project. So with this, you are going to use the guidelines of MLA format in order to not only format your paper and all of your citations, but also you're going to use MLA, just like the basic goals of MLA format. With this, what you're doing, so let's talk about the whole project. Like, what this is a project that's broken up in 3 stages. The first stage is an annotated bibliography, which is the goal of which is to find your sources, read your sources, and summarize your sources and think about how you'll use those sources in your final paper. And so that's step 1. Step 2 is a research proposal, where you propose the type of research that you're going to do. You say, this is my plan for writing. Here's what I think I'm going to write about in my final paper. And then, of course, step 3 is that final paper. I don't really feel like you can... I don't feel like you can really understand what you need to do for your annotated bibliography unless you understand the final paper. So with Unit 1 and in Week 1, where I have this folder titled Familiarize Yourself with Unit 1, I'm going to start by talking about the final paper. But remember, that's not due until... Let me check my calendar. That's not due until the 25th of March. So you do have 2 steps before that final paper that you'll have to turn in. But there, again, both of those steps are working toward the final paper. So there's no point in talking about those steps without talking about the final paper first. So I'm going to skip ahead to the final paper guidelines. What I'm going to do is just kind of walk you through what these guidelines are asking you to do. And I'll skip some things that maybe are more important for later on, but I'll talk about the things that are most important now. Wow, I'm really small. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to kind of read through the prompt here, and I will pause at various increments just to kind of talk more about this assignment. In a fully researched MLA formatted essay that is 2,500 to 3,800 words, that's about 7 to 10 pages, it can include your works cited page. So in a fully researched MLA format essay, argue as to how accurately 1 or 2 fictional movies or 1 fictional television series depicts a career of your choice. Okay, so there's a couple keywords here. First of all is fictional. You want to make sure that you're choosing something that's not a documentary or not reality TV, because you can't really say if it's a documentary that it's depicted inaccurate or it's depicted accurately, because that's kind of like, well, duh, it's a documentary. You don't have an argument there. Now, if you wanted to, and I have had someone do this in the past, somebody looked at a reality TV series on, I think, like farming, like veterinary medicine and farming or something like that. And they argued that actually what you saw on reality TV was not what it was like in real life. That would be okay. And so that's a possibility. If you wanted to argue that a documentary documenting the life of, a surgeon or something like that was actually not accurate, then you would have an argument there. So you could use a documentary or reality TV if you wanted to argue that it's not accurate. However, if you wanted to argue that it is accurate, you really don't have a case for your writing in those instances, which is why I generally recommend to just pick something fictional. And you can get really creative with your choices. Like, for example, I am a big Harry Potter fan, so I would love to spend my time working on a paper where I get to watch and analyze Harry Potter. And of course, I'm a teacher, so maybe what I would do is analyze the accuracy of the teachers portrayed in Harry Potter, and maybe I would do research, like I would look up what it's like to be a boarding school teacher, and see how accurate that is, since, as you know, in Harry Potter, they stay at their school, so it's kind of like boarding school. So that's kind of like a couple of keywords that I want you to think about is this concept of fictional. Also, career. So we're talking about jobs here, and this is how I'm incorporating the concept of our course, which is writing across the disciplines. I want you to think about what job you might want to have in the future and see if maybe you'd be interested in writing about that. That's not a requirement. In fact, another idea I've always had is like, maybe I'd write about Grey's Anatomy, because I'm always really curious. I love that show, and I'm wondering like, how accurate is Grey's Anatomy? Is that really what goes on in a hospital? I'm not sure. Like, are surgeons, is that really what their job looks like, or is that just dramatized for television? So I always have found that very interesting. And career is important here because I'm not asking about the accuracy of anything. I'm not asking about historical accuracy. I'm not asking about the accuracy of a political movement or of the government or something like that. I'm talking about a depiction of a career. So your movie or TV show that you choose has to be depicting a job, and you have to analyze whether that job depiction or a representation is true or not. You can get really creative with this if you want. In the past, I've had somebody analyze The Lord of the Rings, and she made the claim that the orcs in The Lord of the Rings were like depicting blacksmithing, and then she made the argument that that depiction was accurate within the movie. So if you want to kind of stretch your argument a little bit, you definitely can. And if you're curious, like you have an idea but you're not sure, well, would this work? Of course, you can email me and we can talk about your plan, and we can kind of tweak your ideas if they need to be tweaked a little bit. Okay, so moving on. Support your argument with specific detailed scenes and dialogue from the movie or TV series, and with research documentation from sources like professional handbooks, textbooks, scholarly articles, blogs, or other non-scholarly articles and magazines to prove your points. So what you're going to do is you're going to analyze your show, and later on in this unit, we'll talk about how to organize your writing and the different types of paragraphs that we'll probably see within your essay. And main paragraphs are going to be analysis paragraphs where you show me scenes from the movie or your TV show. You present some dialogue and you say, okay, here's what I'm seeing happening on the screen, and this is what it's suggesting. So, like, for example, in Harry Potter, I'm seeing the teachers scold their students for being late, for speaking out of turn, for goofing off in class. And that suggests that teachers have to hold their students to a certain standard. Now my question is whether this is accurate or not. Does this really happen in high school? Or, yeah, I guess high school would be a good for Harry Potter. Does this really happen in high school boarding schools? Is it done in this way? How accurate is this? So you have a paragraph where you're analyzing, but then you also have a paragraph where you're supporting your argument about accuracy with researched sources. So I might look at a magazine about boarding schools, or I might look at pedagogical arguments about how to teach at a boarding school in a scholarly article or something like that in order to argue whether or not it's accurate. So the bulk of this essay in this paper is it's kind of twofold. You've got your analysis, but then you also have your research. Your essay must incorporate one or two primary sources, so that's either one TV show or two movies, or you can just have one movie. That's totally fine. Those are your primary sources because that's what you're analyzing. And then you also have to have at least 6 secondary sources. So that means you have a total of at least 7 sources, at least 1 primary and at least 6 secondary sources. One of those secondary sources has to be a book. It could be a textbook. It could be a handbook. And one has to be a scholarly article. And that is just to get you away from doing all of your research on Google. Okay. In this week, I think I also talk about how to find scholarly articles and how to start research, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so let's look at an example thesis statement. And again, this is for the final paper in this unit, but all of the other assignments in this unit are working towards you completing this goal. So here's a sample thesis. While Grey's Anatomy is one of the most popular television series of the past 10 years, this should actually be in italics. While Grey's Anatomy is one of the most popular television series of the past 10 years, its depiction of the nursing profession gives audiences a false sense of the relationship between nurses and doctors. This is an okay thesis statement. I would probably want a little bit more details, like what specifically between nurses and doctors is false, like the romantic relationships, or how doctors treat nurses, or how nurses do more work in the real world than they're depicted on TV, whatever. So there's some maybe room for improvement with this thesis, but you get the idea. I'm arguing that Grey's Anatomy is actually not accurate and on the grounds of this relationship between nurses and doctors. Whenever we talk more in week 5 or 6 about the paper, I'll go over these requirements and I'll talk a little bit about the rubric, but this is the goal of the paper. This is where we're working toward. Now this week, so I'm going to exit out of here. This week, you're going to work on your annotated bibliography. That's the whole point of this week and next week, because your annotated bibliography is due on February 18th. So you have about 2 weeks to do this. Let's talk about how you're going to do your annotated bib. It's 100 points. So remember, with the syllabus said that if you had to turn in any work late, it would be minus 4 points per day on 100-point assignments. And you'll just upload your essay into, or your annotated bibliography into Blackboard. And here's the prompt. Again, I'll just pause whenever I need to. Remember, all of these sources are your preliminary research for your final essay. Your final essay is analyzing a movie or TV show to prove whether a profession has been accurately portrayed or not. So again, all the research that you're doing for your annotated bibliography is for that final paper. It's kind of like, instead of me just assigning the paper, I'm assigning the research first, and then you can write the paper later. Create an MLA formatted annotated bibliography with your 1 or 2 primary sources and 5 to 7 secondary sources. 1 must be a print book and 1 must be a scholarly article. Now, again, it's perfectly fine to have a textbook or a handbook. You can even use an ebook. I know I say print, but an ebook is perfectly fine as long as it's like legitimately a book, okay? The paragraph description under each annotated bibliography will contain 2 parts. First of all, before I even talk about these 2 parts, let me talk a little bit about an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography is a list of your sources that you plan to use for your final paper. You don't necessarily have to use them in your final paper, so it's okay if you find these sources and you only use a couple of them later, or some people even change their whole project as the bibliography, like as their project goes along, and that's perfectly fine as well. But underneath each one of your sources is a paragraph. And so within that paragraph, I want to see 2 things. First, I want to see a 4 to 5 sentence summary of the source. Please don't include any quotations. It's just a summary. It's basically, you've read through your source, you understand what your source is, and you are just giving me the main ideas of your source. So 4 to 5 sentences of a summary, and then a 2 to 3 sentence evaluation or an analysis of how you plan to use that source in your essay. So if I was talking about my primary source, first I would begin by, and going along the lines of using Harry Potter as my example, I would first begin by summarizing maybe Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So what happens in the movie. And then in 2 to 3 sentences after I summarize the movie, I would say, something like, this is my primary source. In my essay, I will analyze it in order to argue that teachers are portrayed accurately. Specifically, I will look at the scene from when Harry and Ron are late to class and Professor McGonagall jokes about turning them into a map and a pocket watch. And I will also specifically look at the scene where Professor Snape is making fun of Harry for being famous, right? Okay, so these are the two scenes, the big scenes that I'm going to use, and this is how I'm going to use this source in my final paper. So that's the whole annotated bibliography. It's your primary source or sources and 5 to 7 secondary sources. You list out the citation, it's like a works cited page with paragraphs underneath. For an example of this, please go to page 367 in your Prentice Hall reference guide, because you can see what it's going to look like. You've got your citation here, and you've got a paragraph underneath your citation with your summary and your analysis, okay? So that's what an annotated bibliography is. If you need to look at examples, then you can find them in this folder in week 1, and I'll get there in just a second. So please email me if you have any questions about the annotated bibliography, or you can, of course, post them in the student questions and help discussion forum for everyone. Let's briefly talk about the penalties for this assignment, just in case you don't meet all the requirements. There are a total of 6 sources because you have to have at least 1 primary source, and you have to have at least 5 secondary sources. So that means you're going to have a total of 6 sources. If you're missing any, if you only have 5 or if you only have 4 or something like that, then I take off 5 points per source that's missing. So if you only had 4 and you needed 6, I would take off 10 points. You do have to have a scholarly article. So if your annotated bibliography does not contain a scholarly article, I will also subtract 5 points. Same thing for a book. If your annotated bibliography does not have a book, I will take off 5 points. And then also, it's important that you're thinking about your primary source as a source, so your movie or your TV show. If you're missing your movie or your TV show, of course, I'll take off points for that as well. If you only have secondary source content, then you'll have issues there. Some things to kind of think about, use this rubric as a checklist and make sure that you have everything that you need. I'm looking at formatting. So I'm looking at MLA format. We're in the MLA 8th edition. This week and next week, we'll talk heavily about MLA formatting. This week, it will kind of just be the basics of MLA. Next week, it's going to be how do you format a citation, how do you format in-text citations, things like that. I want to make sure that you can format your pages correctly, your citations are correctly formatted. Title it annotated bibliography. Again, use this as a checklist. Just make sure that you've got that done. Make sure that you've got good grammar. If you need a refresher on grammar or anything like that, I really don't cover it in this class. However, in your Prentice Hall reference guide, there's tabs in like the blue section here. And you can't really see that. Whatever. There's tabs in the blue section. The blue tabs are all grammatical things. So if you have a question like, do I put a comma here? I'm not really sure. Please consult your Prentice Hall reference guide. I really expect you guys to have good grammar at this point. And if you don't, then you need to work with yourself to improve your grammar, or have somebody proofread your work, or take your work to the learning lab, the writing center, and have them kind of help you with it. They're not going to proofread it for you and make all the changes for you, because that's not what they do there. But they will kind of point out, okay, well, I see a lot of comma errors, so that seems like a big issue. Let's talk about commas. Let me help you learn how to improve your own writing when you're not here in the lab. So make sure you've got good grammar. And then, of course, I'm really just looking at do you summarize correctly? Do you show your evaluations logically? Like, are you missing anything? Are your summaries too brief? Are they too detailed? Like, do you have way too much stuff in here? You don't need like a turn-by-turn summary. It doesn't have to say like well, this happened, and then this happened, and then this, and this, and this, and this, and this. It's just main idea summary, and that's fine. And then, of course, I ask for specific length. So in this rubric, I'm also trying to make sure that your summaries are the length that I ask for. So, and that's just to kind of get an appropriate gauge on the right amount of summary. It's, less than 4 sentences is probably not enough summary. More than 5 sentences, you're not going to get dinged on by any means. But, if you've got like 30 sentence summaries, your summaries are probably way too detailed. All right, and that's all out of 100 points. Okay, so that's the annotated bibliography. Again, please email me if you have any questions, or shoot me a text in the Remind app, or write in the Blackboard discussion. I'll go over the research proposal in week 3. You can, of course, view the instructions here, but we're not really at that stage yet, and you don't need to know too much about the research proposal, so I'm not going to make this video any longer than it needs to be. I also want you to read a little bit more about starting a research project. So there's some information in your reference guide there. And then, like I said before, there's sample annotated bibliographies. So this folder has 4 different samples, and I want to look at one of them. So I'm just going to open up this one in Google Drive, because I've given you, and hopefully you can see this, I've given you comments. Go smaller. Yeah, there they are. So that you can see the various elements. So like this comment is associated with the citation here, where we've got the TV show Heart of Dixie, information about the creator, the channel that it was aired on, and then the year that it was aired. And then we have a comment here. I'm trying to make this smaller, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Oh well. We have a comment here that says this is the summary of the source. There we go. Now it's way too small, but that's okay. So we see the summary here, and then this is the evaluation of how the student would use this in the final paper. And you can see it's just a list. It's like it's like a works cited page where you have your citation, but under each one of your citations is a paragraph summarizing and explaining how you'll use the source in your paper. In your summary, you're not going to see anything like, I will use this. However, in the evaluation, you will see, I plan on using this book by determining blah, blah, blah. I will use this source to show the inaccuracy. I will need to research and see if doctors actually do breach this confidentiality, blah, blah. So it's perfectly fine to use I in that part of your annotated bib. Some students in the past have also added a works cited page all the way at the bottom of their annotated bibliography. That's not necessary. You don't have to do that. In fact, you shouldn't do that. I probably won't take off points, but this is all you need. What you see here is all you need. Within this folder, you can also find sample graded annotated bibliographies if you wanted to see how I grade, or if you wanted to see anything else like that, like why this student got a C+ and not an A, what did the student do wrong. Then this week you'll also learn more about sources. So I'm going to talk to you about a primary source, talk to you about different types of sources like print sources, scholarly articles, web sources, things like that. And then also, because one of the requirements of this is that you have to have a scholarly article, I'm going to kind of talk to you about how to identify a scholarly article as opposed to like a popular magazine or a professional or trade journal. So there's some differences there, because I don't want you to be confused and accidentally get points taken off because you don't have a scholarly article. Also, what's really important is this section, where can I find scholarly sources? You can use CFCC's ProQuest. and make sure that you select like peer-reviewed works, and that will give you scholarly articles, because things that are peer-reviewed are considered scholarly articles. You can also use Google Scholar. Sometimes they're going to give you scholarly articles and sometimes they're not. So just be careful that you do know what a scholarly article is and you're not accidentally using a source that's not a scholarly article even though you think that it is. We'll talk more about MLA format. And this whole folder is just going to kind of teach you about the basics of MLA, and it's going to give you some videos here to show you how to format your work in MLA on the computer. You'll take your quiz. Your quiz this week is basically showing me that you can format a document in MLA. So that's what you'll do. You'll log into your computer, you'll set up an MLA document, you'll save it, and then you'll email it to me. And then I'm going to teach you probably one of the most important things after you're done with your quiz is I want you to learn how to perform an academic search. And so I have this, and it's a step-by-step tutorial of how to get into my CFCC, go to the library website, go to the articles and e-resources, find ProQuest Central, log in if you have to, type in some of your search criteria, and then get a list of peer-reviewed scholarly journals that will help you with your annotated bib. Okay. What I also like about this is they have a cite function when you're in when you've clicked on the article that you want, it'll cite it for you, and usually it's perfect. So that's kind of a really easy way to get those citations created when you're using this ProQuest option. Of course, and then I want you to begin working on your annotated bibliography. So I just gave you kind of a tactic that you could use with note cards and sources, where you write the citation of your source on one side of a note card and the summary of the source and the evaluation on the other side, so that you kind of have your annotated bib in note card form as you're working with sources. One thing I do want to say is that it's perfectly fine if you want to read a source and you realize that while you thought the source was good, you're actually not going to end up using it in your final paper. You can still use that source on your annotated bibliography, because this is just research, right? That's the whole point of this. So it's okay in your annotated bib to have a source that says, well, here's the source, here's the summary, but I actually don't think I'm going to use this in my paper, and here's why this source is not going to be effective for me. As long as all of your sources aren't, well, I'm not actually going to use this, then there's no problem there. Okay, so that's everything that you guys are going to be doing this week. This video is already very long. I'm going to try to keep them shorter in future weeks, but hopefully this gives you a good rundown of kind of what to do. And of course, as always, if you guys have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me. I'm always happy to respond as quickly as I can. I fixed my phone. It's obviously a new day, so I will get those emails really quickly, or I'll get your text messages through the Remind app with no issues. I hope you guys have a good week. Don't forget, your quiz is due on Wednesday of this week. You do not have anything due on Sunday of this week, so just focus on getting started on that annotated bib once you're done with the quiz. Bye, guys.